What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Monkey Knife Fight Strategy Show. I am Eric Lindquist. I am sitting alongside Greg Ehrenberg. We just got done with a lot of fun NBA action last night. Going to be tough to back up, but we've got 4 games to look at. We've got a couple of looks that we have for some of our favorite numbers to be targeting over on Monkey Knife Fight. But Greg, how you doing today, my dude?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. Just finished a baseball show. Now we're going to talk some basketball. Got another basketball show I'm doing later. And yeah, I mean, this is a 4-game basketball slate. I assume the last one we have the entire season. I haven't actually looked ahead to the schedule, but I mean, I thought we were done with significant size slates. So this is going to be the last time to play any sort of, DFS or get any sort of, NBA players or any kind of slates we're looking at. I think that are going to have 4 more games. Watch, there'll be another one tomorrow, and I just didn't realize it. But
nope,
yeah,
you're correct. You're correct.
I think this is the end of a big NBA playoff slate.
Yeah, you're correct. So I was looking ahead at it. We've got 3 games today that are all 3-1, so they're elimination spots for a number of them, and we'll talk about. I think we'll probably get to about everything over the course of this half hour. But we are also looking forward to the 2-2 game that we have, the Clippers and Mavericks. That should be extremely competitive. But 3-gamer tomorrow, possibility of a 4-gamer on Friday, but you would need a lot of wonky things to happen today. But while you guys are in here, as we get going, hit that like button as you come in the door. Also, Monkey Knife Fight. Let's cover a little bit about what we're talking about today, because if you are not familiar, our show is sponsored by them today. Their player props-based contests are easy to play and don't require the same time commitment that we have to do on DraftKings and FanDuel and all these other DFS sites that you really have to be on top of everything to be competitive. This Monkey Knife Fight allows you to be in charge. whether you want to play NBA, UFC, PGA, esports, soccer, golf. They have everything that you could want. So get started by heading over to monkeyknifefight.com, right there on the bottom of the screen, and choose which game you want to play, your contest type, and your buy-in level. Better yet, Monkey Knife Fight has an instant first match deposit bonus of up to $100 when you sign up with promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO. You know how to spell it at this point in time. New users can also take advantage of a free game tonight, which we're going to cover right now. All you have to do is correctly select whether Trae Young has more or less than 26.5 points and whether or not Julius Randle has more or less than 23.5 points tonight. Mr. Greg Ehrenberg, let me know which side you are on for those two tonight.
All right. So the Julius Randle one, that's going to be a pretty easy under for me. So something we've talked about this in terms of other basketball shows we've done and whatnot with Julius Randle's numbers for the regular season. There's a whole lot of guys in the playoffs like Trae Young on the other side of this. Guys who played, significant minutes in the regular season, but we're going to see boosts in their minutes in the playoffs. A lot of these guys were playing 32, 34 minutes per game in the regular season. Then come the playoffs, they come and play 40 minutes. There's no sort of upside allowance for that with Randle because he was already playing 40 minutes per game in the regular season, 38 to be exact. But either way, there's no significant bump that he could take. That he's playing terribly in this series. And I think this has a lot to do also with the massive workload he played in the regular season. I think he's a little worn down at this point of the year. So I have Randle projected well under that number. So give me the under on him for sure.
I love that. And one part, just to piggyback and add one component to it too, is that you're playing good teams in the playoffs. The Hawks aren't some super scrub team that Julius Randle can go out and get 60 fantasy points against. The Hawks aren't the best team in the NBA, but the level of competition goes up in the playoffs because you're consistently playing what you would assume to be a good basketball team. And so Julius Randle also, in accordance with him having a boost to those minutes, is playing the Hawks. They're not, Houston. They're not playing the Timberwolves. They're not playing these bad teams that might either be up in pace for the Knicks. The Hawks are pretty flat in that regard. And so, yeah, I definitely like the under on Julius Randle as well. What are you kind of thinking for Trae Young? So Trae Young has kind of been Jekyll and Hyde. Difficult for me to really get a gauge for what I want to do with him. Do you like the over the under here?
Yeah, the under still for Trae Young. It's just a pace of play issue where this game, we're not expecting to be a ton of points scored because the Knicks, as much as they haven't looked, particularly great on offense in the playoffs, it's still a team that over the course of the season, they played at a slow pace and they were pretty strong defense. They were hard to score fantasy points. They were hard to score real life points against. So the Knicks finished the year 4th overall in the NBA in defensive efficiency, actually tied for 3rd with Utah. So think about what we think of Utah as a defense. The Knicks were right in line with them. And then if you look at the pace of play, the Knicks played at the slowest pace of any team in the league. So we have a team plays slow, hard to score fantasy points against, hard to score real life points against. And I'm going to shade towards the unders with Trae Young in that sort of situation. If you look at his numbers so far for the series, he scored 27 points, 21 points, 30 points, 32 points. And some of those games, like earlier in the series where he scored 30 plus points, his efficiency was really high and he got to the free throw line a bunch. And, maybe we won't see the same kind of whistle going to him now as the season's gone on. I expect the crowd to be loud. And one thing we know about home court advantage, the reason that it actually shows up and makes a difference in playoff games and the reason it's accounted for whenever you're looking at who you expect to win a game is because it influences how the refs call games. They're more likely to give hometown teams a whistle versus the road team. So I understand that Trae Young early in the series got some of those calls, but I don't know that's going to be the case going forward as much. And it's still a pretty significant number for a game that I don't expect to feature a ton of possessions.
That is a specific take, Greg. That he's coming with the fire here early at 10:40 out here on the West Coast. Love it. Good stuff. Let's kind of get to it, though. We got producer Chris behind the glass taking care of us, going to navigate all of the goodies over at Monkey Knife Fight. Let's just get to a couple of the numbers that we're looking at. The first one on the board that really looks interesting to me, if you have the NBA projected stats page over at Awesemo, if you're an Awesemo Plus member, you're able to toggle back and forth, taking a look at some of those numbers, being able to quickly compare what you're looking at on the Monkey Knife Fight screen to what we have for the NBA projections with the projected stats. If it's fantasy points, Monkey Knife Fight uses the FanDuel scoring, so it's super easy to be able to compare and contrast numbers that you're looking at on the board. But the first one right off the bat on Monkey Knife Fight that piqued my interest, that's a fun word for Kayla Canarum, if you're going back to those days. But she's not on this show. We don't need to pay her mind, even though we love her. Let's go to the Utah versus Memphis game. Very first prop that exists on the board there. here. Donovan Mitchell in the more or less, taking less than 28.5 points. I really want to kind of be under on that. And then John Morant, 25.5, who's been electric, absolutely unbelievable in this series. Still hasn't resulted in a bunch of wins, but he's been spectacular. What are you kind of thinking about both of these numbers? Are you siding with me on the under for both?
Yeah, for sure. So this is another one where we just talked about before the Knicks defense. Now it's been, fairly comparable to the Jazz's. And, both these teams, very difficult to score real life points against, very difficult to score fantasy points against. The Jazz also don't play at a super high pace. With Donovan Mitchell for this series, he's looked fine coming back from the ankle injury. We've seen him score in terms of points per game, 25, 29, 30 in the 3 games so far this series. The usage has been massive for him, 36%, 45.3%, 40.3%. So really a ton of shots going towards him. But I am a little bit concerned about blowout risk in this game. Utah Jazz, I still consider them to be a lot better than the Memphis Grizzlies. Even if Memphis ended up playing that last game tight, Utah still ran away with it a little bit later. And also that game was played in Memphis. Tonight's game is played in Utah. I think this is the game of any of the games on tonight's slate that has the most risk of becoming one-sided. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the outcome. So that's something that's personally making me a little wary of projecting some of the starters here for 40-plus minutes. So I like the under also because these numbers are really high, especially the Mitchell number.
Agreed. And as Chris has got up on the screen right there, Awesemo projecting for 24.6 expected points in 33 minutes. Those minutes are starting to trend up a little bit. Went 28 or 26 to 30, and now we're getting to 32, 33. We're moving up, but that's still going to be a number that is a little bit too high. And I think that there's some nice cushion on the under there. Same thing with John Morant, 21.29. That's another number that it looks like on Awesemo really sticks out for all of us involved. Let's move ourselves along to the star shootout. So we just covered there's individual games. So if you're waiting for the late night hammer and you want to get some action in on the back end, you can go to the individual games. But for the most part, a lot of the all-encompassing props that we're looking at are from the star shootout spot. So one that we've got targeted is the more or less on 5X. So if we can go to the 5X one, let's see which one is that. I'm going across. Hold, please. We're going to find it here, more or less. So we've got Russell Westbrook. All right. We got Russell Westbrook, Kawhi Leonard, and Luka Doncic. There it is. We've got that. It's going to be probably one more over. There we go. Crushed it. Russell Westbrook, 58.5 fantasy points. Large number. We're going to have no Joel Embiid. We just got news that he's got a meniscus tear, which crazy to think that that's going to be day to day, but he's not going to be rim protecting. He's going to give Russell Westbrook some extra attempts at the hoop. We saw him get to the line an absolute bunch in that last game, but 58.5 fantasy points against a pretty still stout Philadelphia defense. That's going to be a large number. I'm going to take the under there. Same thing with Kawhi Leonard. Dallas, he's been playing great here, but I think that's just a little bit too large of a number as well. Got him projected more in the high 40s. I think Kawhi Leonard 53.5, probably an under there. And Luka Doncic, you can kind of go either direction on it. So you can pick 3 out of 3. If you want to try a different one, instead of the more or less, you could go to something where you can pick 3 of the 4. But for this one specifically, I think I still want to shade on the under, especially if I'm going to take the under on Kawhi. They're correlated a little bit if that game can be a little bit underneath the total. Both of them are the most meaningful players on their team from a fantasy perspective, and they're going to probably correlate a little bit from a game flow perspective. But Greg, what are you kind of feeling about these 3 as well?
So the one that stands out to the most to me is Luka and the under. The reason being is I'm not sure how healthy he is. So if maybe you're not a doctor, I'm not a doctor. I know Eric's wearing his smart person.
We don't have Dr. Ben Rasa.
Yeah, that's what we need. Eric looks like a doctor. He's got his smart guy glasses on. Also makes him look like Woj. Yeah, exactly. So he's got all the information. But listen, last game. So Luka Doncic, he has a cervical strain, which is a neck injury, and he just didn't look the same last game. He looked uncomfortable for a lot of the game. Even 2 games ago, he played really well until down the stretch of the game. You kind of saw him. He was hanging his head a little bit. He was grabbing it at his shoulder. And supposedly the neck injury, it's impacting the amount of feel that he has. I think it's in his left arm, one of his arms, whatever. It's been bothering him, and it seemed to show up in the stat sheet last game. Ended up playing 36 minutes, but still only 34 fantasy points in that time. And then also Dallas ended up losing that game by 25 points. Now we have a series that's knotted at 2. We have a game here with the Clippers. I think if Luka isn't going to be at full health like he wasn't last game, that's a pretty big concern here. And even as is, I think the number is probably a little bit too high if Luka was totally healthy. And now, given that Luka might only be at 75% or maybe even lower than that, I feel pretty comfortable going the under. Of the ones we just read out, that's the one I feel best about.
All right. So do you ever think about things in terms of stacking a game to fit a certain game script? If you're going to combine a bunch of props together, I think you see that a number of times. If you had a game like yesterday where you took the over on a bunch of props in a double overtime Denver and Portland game, you probably were sitting pretty good in DFS, probably pretty good on Monkey Knife Fight, probably pretty good around the industry. Do you ever consider things like that?
It depends. I'm more going to look at the numbers and what I feel about them overall. So in terms of Kawhi, I have a slate over on Kawhi, and then I have an under on Luka. So I wouldn't do that. But maybe a game like the Memphis Utah game, like I think there's a good amount of blowout risk there. If you think that if that's a game that is fairly likely to blow out, I think it makes sense to put a lot of the unders together, because if that's a game where, let's say, Utah wins by 20 points, 18 points, something like that, and maybe the starters don't play in the fourth quarter, it stands to reason all of those guys would hit the under. So that's something from a game theory perspective that I could see making sense.
Awesome. Well, that would be a 5x return on your money. That would be pretty awesome. I would sign up for all of that I possibly could. Let's get to one more, and then we'll kind of look around the market together. We'll look across Monkey Knife Fight, but the other one that I really wanted to target in on is this triple play bonus, this triple doubling bonus that they have going on Monkey Knife Fight that is now up to $8,000 here for June 2nd. So they keep adding $500 to the point. It's a very difficult thing. There's no question. All three players in the lineup have to hit a triple double in order for you to share a portion of that $8,000. You could win it all outright if you had the three players who did it, and it was different from what everybody else had. But right now, all you have to do is put $5 minimum in, and you can go to 0.2 and get the 1.5x return, 1.2x return. If you think two of the three can get there, you could go to the 3x, but I'm probably going to recommend kind of getting the baseline $5 thrown into the middle there and combining my picks. The three that I have most likely to triple double today are going to be Russell Westbrook. Obviously, I don't think that that's going to be a surprise. One that might be a surprise is Ben Simmons, who's kind of projecting pretty darn close across the board. No Joel Embiid on the golf course. Good Lord. Can you tell that I've been looking at a little bit of golf stuff this morning for Monkey Knife Fight as well? But Ben Simmons, rebounds and assists, pretty close to 10 if you look at our NBA DFS projections for the day. And the last one can kind of be hit or miss, but I am going to go Luka Doncic. I think that makes the most sense as a guy that could do it. Is there anybody different from those three that you would think would be most likely to triple double, or anybody else that would be a contrarian play that might have the opportunity to do such a thing?
Well, I mean, Russell Westbrook is clearly the most likely, and I don't think there's anybody else even remotely in the same realm as him. I actually think Russell Westbrook is more likely to triple-double than to not triple-double today. Ben Simmons with Joel Embiid off the court. I'm just pulling up his numbers right here per 36 minutes. The numbers on Ben Simmons, he's averaging 17 points and then about 8.5 assists, 8.5 rebounds per 36 minutes with Embiid off the court. And then we have to think that he's probably playing in the neighborhood of 40 minutes today. They're looking to close this game out. And for sure, after we saw what happened with Joel Embiid getting hurt in the last game, you have to think the Wizards, that the Sixers just want to get the Wizards out of here, just move on to the next round. So I think we're going to see really heavy minutes tonight from Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris. So pretty easily for me, Westbrook 1, Simmons 2. I don't think anybody else is very likely to triple-double, though. I guess Luka just by default becomes the next answer. If you want to go off the board with somebody, Julius Randle, I guess, although he hasn't played particularly well in the playoffs. But at least I look at it from this sort of game theory perspective. Most people are going to be putting in Westbrook, Simmons, and Doncic, I assume. At least if you go Randle, Simmons, Westbrook, it's something a little different. I don't think it's very likely to hit it all, but that would be the way that I would go.
Yeah, I don't mind that completely. I'm pulling up a number of triple doubles here on the season. Obviously, Russell Westbrook is just above and away just the highest number there. He's had 40 of them over the course of the regular season. There were less than the normal 82 games, so I'm not sure what that is. One-for-one comparison. Luka had 11, so he's fourth on the board. Jokic, Harden, and then it would be Luka, so 11. He's basically 1 out of every 7 games that he's going to be triple-doubling if you're just looking at that from the raw number perspective. And then it becomes Sabonis. There's some other guys amongst them, but Julius Randle has had a couple of them here. I'm not sure what the number is specifically. It's underneath 10 because he's not showing on the list, but a guy that I think could actually sneak that that as well. Not somebody, you could definitely go out and put up 50 plus fantasy points in this spot, but we've talked about a little bit of our apprehension of wanting to be bullish on Julius Randle because compared to the other studs, he doesn't necessarily look as good going forward. But anybody else that you might want to touch base with that could possibly triple double? But I think that, as you said, those are the three, putting Randle in there as well. Maybe a Kawhi Leonard or Paul George. Which one of those two might you put into a lineup?
Neither. But
Okay,
by
perfect.
the way, Julius Randle, 6 triple doubles this year.
Very good.
I just looked it up. But yeah, I wouldn't go with Kawhi Leonard or Paul George. I assume neither one of them triple double this year. I'm going to see what was even the most assists that Kawhi Leonard has in a game this year.
Not many.
I have a feeling he didn't have any games with double digit assists. Oh, he did. He had one game, January 5th against the Spurs. He had 10 assists, but just 3 rebounds. So only one game we're getting double digit assists from Kawhi Leonard. Doesn't seem super likely for him to hit it. Paul George, looking through his box score, the most assists he had this year. He also had a game with 10 assists, although also some of these games, I think Kawhi Leonard's game was a game that Paul George was out. And then Paul George had 1 10 assist game that Kawhi Leonard was out. Also a game he had 10 assists, but only 5 rebounds. So no triple doubles for Paul George this year. So is there a chance that one of these guys triple doubles tonight? I mean, it's not 0%, but it's low enough to the point that I would want to take a chance on it. I think if you're going with this, you want to go Westbrook and Simmons for sure. And then Luka and Randle would be the only 2 other viable options.
Perfect. Well, let's take a look at Star Shootout. We've got one more thing that we can maybe take a look at. We'll see if Chris can follow along with me. But I think one more thing that might be an interesting way of playing it, rapid fire. If you look at the very first rapid fire on the Star Shootout, the exact one that we're on there, we've got points. Bradley Beal versus Kawhi Leonard, with Kawhi Leonard getting 1.5 points, which I find to be interesting. And Russell Westbrook assists up against Trae Young, who's getting 3.5 assists. So when you start factoring in these bonuses, if you're looking at the projected stats page over at Awesemo and you're trailing back and forth, Bradley Beal is projected for the most raw points out of anybody on the slate at 31.73. Which is going to be very different from looking at Kawhi Leonard, who, is 28.91, but getting that 1.5, probably going to be closer in your model based on the way that you feel about Kawhi Leonard today, does get there from a raw points perspective mostly. And then Russell Westbrook up against Trae Young. If you sort it by assists going towards that top end, you've got Russell Westbrook, who's 11.22, but Trae Young getting 3.5. That is a large number to be getting on Trae Young. I might be taking the Trae Young side of that. So points, Bradley Beal versus Kawhi Leonard, Russell Westbrook versus Trae Young. I'm going to put a little money on that now. Greg, which direction do you want me to go?
Well, first, Beal versus Kawhi, I find that to be a very efficient line. I think that is pretty correct. And then the other one you asked me was Trae Young versus Russell Westbrook.
Yep. And Trae Young gets 3.5 assists. So there's a couple of these lines where you get these bonuses on players and you're factoring those in, just kind of going through the process of being able to go back and forth between the projections page to be able to kind of come to your own conclusions on whether or not that bonus is worth it. Or, considering Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook are in the same game, you could maybe find a small bit of correlation there, but nothing substantial for sure that I'd be that interested for these ones specifically. But Trae Young versus Russell Westbrook, Trae Young getting 3.5 assists.
Yeah, so Trae Young for the series, he's been a pretty good distributor. He's averaging 10 assists per game. Russell Westbrook in this series against the 76ers is averaging right around 12 assists per game. So certainly if we're just looking at who's going to have more assists today, Russell Westbrook, I project to have more assists, but the 3.5 number has me leaning towards Trae Young. I think that number should probably be like 2.5.
Perfect. Yeah, so those are the kind of things that you can be doing over at Monkey Knife Fight. If anybody has any questions as well, throw it into, she can't play in Tennessee. That is a bummer because this is awfully fun to be playing out here in California. It's a great way to get some interest in some of these props for the playoffs. Is there anything else that caught your eye as you're kind of skimming through? If you have Monkey Knife Fight pulled up here, is there anything else that you wanted to address? Is there kind of a process that you might have if you're trying to? There's ways if you're exposed to some of these early games, you could probably find a 1v1 and hedge out of a certain position if it's like the late night hammer, Kawhi and Doncic, and if you have an under that's kind of sitting there for a 10x return, you could basically have a little bit of money to hedge out on the other side with like a Kawhi and Doncic more or less, or something to that regard. But does anything else stick out for you here as we're starting to close out, Greg?
No, I was just gonna say we could look at some of the Dwight Howard numbers just because something I think is interesting, and this is something that would probably be more for later in the day than right now, is so we know that Joel Embiid's out, right? He has the meniscus injury, he's day to day, but for sure we know he's not playing today. So for this purposes, we only care about this game. And Dwight Howard has some pretty lofty prop numbers that are up, but I'm not positive he's going to start. Last game, we had no Joel Embiid, and in the second half, Mike Scott started. I don't think Mike Scott's going to go out and play 30 minutes or anything like that, but I don't know that Dwight Howard is a lock to play 30 minutes just because Joel Embiid is out. So one thing I think is interesting here is let's say we find out that Dwight Howard is in fact not starting. He only played 14 minutes last game, even with Joel Embiid only playing 11 minutes. I don't know that we're going to see a massive workload from Dwight Howard depending on that starting lineup. So especially if Mike Scott ends up starting, I think some of the unders on Dwight Howard would be pretty sensible.
I 100% agree. That's a great take. I would also point out, too, that Daniel Gafford kind of ran amok. He's 6'10". He's a bigger dude. And Mike Scott kind of looked small in comparison to Daniel Gafford. He really took advantage of that size disparity in the third and fourth quarter. Gafford played pretty darn well coming down the stretch. I was worried because I felt like I had a lot of exposure to him on DraftKings that wasn't going to get there. And he had a monster second half with Mike Scott out there trying to defend him. He had a bunch of blocks. Daniel Gafford did as well. That helped him get there from a fantasy perspective. I think Dwight Howard, I mean, you just never know. It's Doc Rivers. He's just the most inconsistent coach when it comes to trying to predict these center rotations without Joel Embiid. But I am absolutely in agreement that if you get Dwight Howard not starting, I find it difficult to think that he's going to eclipse the 20 minutes. And you're talking about Russell Westbrook from a rebounding perspective. I think that it's just so certain that he's going to be getting 8, 9, 10 plus rebounds. We have him projected over on Awesemo 12.14. That's actually more rebounds than Dwight Howard straight up. I know Dwight's getting that 0.5, but I don't think that's enough with the amount of risk that would be surrounding a non-starting Dwight Howard. So I love that take. Any final words as we're starting to close this out? As I said, check out Monkey Knife Fight. Take advantage of that Awesemo deposit bonus. But Greg, any final words?
No, just pay attention to the Sixers starting lineup. My assumption actually is that it's going to be Mike Scott, although just a guess for me based on some other recent examples we had, and then also what they ended up doing last game. So that's going to be something that has a pretty massive impact on what the expectation should be for these players. But other than that, good luck today, guys.
Good luck. Promo code AWESEMO. Get that $100 first deposit match for new users as well. That Trae Young versus Julius Randle. We both like the under of that game. They correlate nicely, the two studs. Basically, let's just hope they do the opposite of what Jokic and Lillard did last night, because that was awfully fun going on those unders. But best of luck to you. Thank you so much to Monkey Knife Fight for giving us this opportunity to talk about your product. Looking forward to seeing you guys in the streets over there, and best of luck.